The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to our Gorkana webinar looking at the importance of social media insights in financial services PR. My name is Alistair Wheat and I head up the social media insights team here at Gorkana. We'd love to connect with anyone on the call afterwards. You can get me by email there or tweet me or reach me on LinkedIn. As we're going through, if you've got questions, feel free to put those in the webinar panel for questions. If you're listening to this as a recording later on and you have questions, by all means either tweet them to us at Gorkana or directly to me at Alistair Tweet. If you've got just general questions about our events program or the specific subjects you'd like to ask us about, you can send an email to events at Gorkana. Particularly welcome any sort of feedback about today's event as well. So today we're going to look at social media and reputation in financial services, specifically with a view to how PRs can monitor social media channels. And I'm going to be, obviously, with the PR link, focusing quite heavily on how journalists use Twitter. What are the things that they do and how can journalists then monitor those? What are the techniques that journalists can use, PRs can use to monitor journalists, and what are the benefits of doing that? What are the challenges with doing that? I'm also going to give a few practical tips about how to use alerts, because there's a lot going on. It's hard to keep on top of everything. So I'm going to look at specific reputational things that can happen and be discussed in social media, and then how to use tools to alert members of the PR team when something pops up that needs to be reacted to quickly. Finally, we're going to also talk a little bit about social media analysis and reporting. So this is going to be looking at longer-term trends. There are a number of challenges with doing that, but regardless of whether you have this as something that you outsource or whether you do it internally, I'm just going to go through a few principles that hopefully can help you get more insights into what's happening with your reputation through social media monitoring. So financial services and banks in particular have been having a bit of a hard time of late. This quote from Andrew Tyree, I think, sums it up quite well. He says, confidence has been badly shaken and needs to be rebuilt. That's a big job, and it's not going to be done in a year or two. It's a job that will need to take place over many years. And so the question then is, what role does social media play in this? Well, we know that social media can often make a bad situation worse. If you do get negative stories in the press, often those negative stories will be picked up on by people who've maybe got a grievance. They just generally don't like corporates or don't like banks in particular, and they'll often use their own social media networks to amplify bad stories and to put their own commentary onto that. It can also put a negative or cynical spin on stories that are actually positive or neutral in tone. So you may actually get some good PR coverage, but then journalists in a way they're also suffering a bit of a trust issue at the moment, and so they may also be seen as in cahoots with the banks. And so when you look at the social media discussions off the back of maybe positive coverage, you may see people spinning it around and focusing on the negatives, or just saying that they don't trust the journalists who are writing these stories. Social media is also very good or bad, depending on the point of view, at perpetuating rumors and myths. There's lots of facts and so-called facts that circulate out there that can be really damaging for your business, and it's a little bit like whack-a-mole sometimes, trying to stop those from spreading, and the more you try to put a rumor out, the more likely it is actually to spread further. On the plus side though, if you get it right, good social media monitoring can act as a really useful early warning signal. The publishing cycle, especially for the main publishers, is increasingly rapid these days, and the time between a story being discovered or an issue being discovered to when it actually goes to press, or especially to be published online, is now just a matter of hours. So is there any signal that you can get by monitoring social media to see when a story is about to break? So even if it's just a few hours heads up, that could be quite a useful means to be able to get your response ready for when it hits the mainstream channels. Social media monitoring can also provide, just generally, a really useful insight into overall public opinion. I say here, use with caution, because obviously in social media you do sometimes get the angry voices or the activists who maybe speak louder and are more active, and that can potentially distort the overall view of what the general public think. We saw, I think, a very good example of this with the recent Scottish referendum. If you just looked at social media, you would be under the impression that the Yes campaign was going to romp to a landslide victory because they were clearly dominating the debate in social media channels. And when the vote actually came round, it was actually a fairly comfortable win for the No campaign. That was largely to do with the fact that the age range that was mainly supporting Yes was more the typical age range that's active on social media, so 16 to 35-year-olds. And it was actually the older population, the pensions, who came out very strongly No, that actually swung the overall vote. Students also actually supporting No, worried about their fees. But that's, I think, a good example of why you have to sometimes be wary about drawing too much of a conclusion about what you see in social media. And the same can be true in financial services, that if we're just looking at social media opinion, it isn't necessarily a fully representative slice. But nonetheless, you can get some really valuable insight from doing social media analysis. So I'd say with PRs, you're obviously not the only people in the business who are interested in social media. In some companies, unfortunately, PR is the last bit of the business to really get stuck in, and other departments like marketing or customer services have really led the way. But I would say that for PRs looking to see what's going on in social media, they need to focus their attention. And so social media monitoring, sometimes less can be more. The key here is to target, and I'd say the real focus should be on journalists and media influencers because they're increasingly using Twitter and social media as part of their day-to-day work. And why are they important? Well, they've got important real-world connections. It's not just a social media influencer, per se, and they proactively go out looking for new information and new stories that they can break for everyone else. They are usually, here I put in brackets, reliable sources. Hopefully they're not the ones perpetuating these myths and rumors. And also, they make speed a priority. Quite often, journalists will want to be the first to be seen to be getting that piece of information out in the public domain. And so that makes it a challenge a bit for PRs to make sure that they're on top of what the journalists are saying on Twitter. The other thing is also they are highly interconnected. Now look at this chart. It's a bit of it's a nice and pretty chart, isn't it? Yes. This is actually from 2011, and this is mapping out the relationship between various different journalists and publishers on Twitter, and this just shows all the interconnections with them. So the main thing to conclude from this is just that journalists all follow each other. They're all very interconnected. They're all very aware of what other journalists are doing, and they're very keen to make sure that they are doing something different from the crowd, and they're breaking stories ahead of the others and sharing insights and opinions that are unique. So we here at Golconda, hopefully you do know, you maybe don't know, but we actually do a lot of social media analysis ourselves for clients, but also internally. We track a whole variety of journalists. We track all the UK national journalists, as well as various journalists in the States and on certain subjects internationally. And that gives us quite a nice big pot of data to analyze and look for trends and insights. And so just looking at the UK national journalists, we see we have about 2,300 UK national journalists active every month on Twitter, and they tweet collectively about 270,000 times per month. That works out as an average of about 4 tweets per day. So your average UK national journalist tweets 4 times per day. Bear in mind though that actually they're mostly active Monday to Friday, so really they're more like sort of 5 to 6 tweets per day during the working week. Now you may be thinking, I work in financial services. Our journalists are not really quite as active as your average journalist. Well, actually, if that's what you think, you'd be wrong, because interestingly enough, we've zoomed in here on 150 UK national journalists who focus on finance in the city, and they are actually 10% more active than your average journalist. They tweet about 4.4 times per day. So, so Twitter is certainly no less important in financial services and banking, and perhaps more so than other subject areas. But it does come a little bit behind, or a fair bit behind, political journalists, who I think we can probably guess are the most active, and they are tweeting on average about 7 times a day. So a lot going on. If we look at some individual financial journalists on Twitter, these are our top 3, and here's how often they tweet per day. So Katie Martin there, 27, Danny, 32, and Dina Medins there, she actually tweets on average of about 60 times a day. So some of these journalists are really busy. They're doing all sorts of things. They're talking to people online. They're sharing their opinions and circulating their own content, but also content from their colleagues, but also quite often they're sharing just anything that interests them on the web. Now, the Scottish referendum we mentioned already, that was a very busy day, especially for the political journalists. This is here showing the number of UK national political journalists who are active on Twitter by hour through the 18th and the 19th of September. Now you can see the very beginning of the chart on the left, middle of the night, so everyone's actually sleeping, not much Twitter activity going on there, but then it was pretty much a solid run all the way through the next night. So you can see people tweeting through the wee small hours of the night, and then busy through the next day. There was that spike about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the 19th when Alex Salmond announced his resignation. So when a big story is going on, journalists are very much glued to Twitter. They are busy and they're active, trying to keep abreast of the latest activities and sharing any little nuggets that they've managed to get hold of. So what does this mean for PRs? Well, it's a bit of a challenge, isn't it, to keep a track of all of that? And frankly, I've been a little bit surprised and even disappointed sometimes when I've spoken to financial PRs about how they go about trying to track what's going on Twitter. And these are some quotes. I'm obviously not going to name who they're from. Hopefully, no one actually on the call who said these things. But this is one I said. The guy said, "Oh, I already follow my journalist on the Twitter," and he did actually say the Twitter, which gave me a clue as to how familiar he was with the platform. Another quote was, "Oh, I just use TweetDeck to monitor for mention." So he just had a TweetDeck, free monitoring tool, and stuck the bank's name in, and then just saw what came up, and that was it for him. And another lady said, "Alarm agency monitors social media for us," and actually, have a fair few people who've said that. So it's kind of just left the social media agency to come up with and to keep an eye on the important things that are going on. None of these things are wrong, right? It's good to follow journalists on Twitter. It's fine to use TweetDeck to track for things going on, and it's great if you've got an agency you can also keep an eye on things. But I would really say for agencies, they should be there as a backup. They shouldn't be your primary means of keeping a tab on what's going on. And obviously, I know we've got quite a few agencies on the call. And absolutely, you do need to keep an eye on what's going on with your clients. So, all good things. But I would really want to say that there's too much going on, really, to have a casual, dipping approach to social listening. And if you, we're professionals here, we need to be actually using a professional tool set to do this in a structured and organized manner. So I just want to look at a few specific ways in which journalists are using Twitter. So here's a tweet just from yesterday from Sylvia Merler saying, China net new lending to Russia, some stats there. And then this is quite a typical thing. We get Jeffrey Smith, who's news editor for Europe at Fortune. He tweets back, any detail on the borrowers? Is it all pipeline related, or is it refinancing the bank? So this is quite a typical sort of interaction where we see journalists talking to each other, trying to get clarification on stats and information. Is Jeffrey going to go then and write something about that? Is he going to use it in his own article, expanding on it? And there are opportunities for PRs if we track the conversations between journalists to sometimes get an idea of when people are working on a story. And also we may also have our own, when people are asking for clarification, you may have some stats and information that you can share as well. There's often a race to be the first to get something out. So this was just prior to the Scottish referendum. Tim Wallace saying Tesco Bank also set to move HQ out of Scotland. Their boss told me he has ambitions to be as big as HSBC. So we can say this is very important. So just, a piece of connection that he's got, and he's gone out and told people what he heard. And here's Tom Clark. Have heard a very senior banker say this week that this RBS stuff is about redomiciling. Holding company is just about moving a brass plate. So again, that comment actually was then, there were stories about it, and Alex Salmond picked up on it saying, well, it's not really that important. It's not going to be a big move. And we also get this sort of tweet here from Jonathan Guthrie. I'm told the 90-day lock-on, Lloyds selling more TSB shares will be a hard one. City was cross when bank waived the lock-up on St. James Place. So quite often, journalists will hear something, they'll find out something, or they'll have an opinion, and they don't want to be waiting to get an article out. They want to just get it out on Twitter so people can see that they were the first to break that little bit of news, even if it's just through Twitter. So, again, if we get the tracking right, there's potentially a little bit of a heads up here for PRs that a journalist has got a piece of information and they're going to write something. Here's another tweet from Andrew People from the Wall Street Journal. Now, he's tweeted, when hashtag HSBC does an FX transaction with another bank, does it pay a 3% charge? I don't think so. Now, many banks have got customer services teams who are looking at mentions, looking at people mentioning them, and HSBC, they've got a really good setup here actually, but they have one of their customer services people getting back to him. Hi Andrew, for more information about how the conversion rate is calculated, please see the following link. And there's a link. Andrew replies, that tells me how it's calculated. It doesn't tell me why it's a fair and reasonable charge. And the conversation goes on, eventually there, Andrew says towards the bottom, I don't believe there's anywhere near that much cost involved in processing FX transactions. And the customer service person replies like, hi Andrew, I'm sorry you feel that way. If you'd like to discuss charges or terms and conditions for the credit card, and then they go on to give the details of how to do direct messaging. So, customer service people doing their job, they don't realize this is actually a journalist perhaps, and he's probably not really asking this as a customer, and they go back trying to be helpful, but this is a subject matter expert. Now, I would argue that these sort of interactions are really the sort of thing that the PR team should be picking up on, and there are processes that can be put in place to make sure that this sort of influencer is flagged to the customer services team or the marketing team if they're doing this sort of thing, and they don't necessarily jump on getting back to the person because that person might actually know more than the customer service exec about the details of how something works. This is the sort of thing that you may say, well, we should get some kind of notification in the PR team that, Andrew's mentioned us and he's asked a question, and really we should be getting back to it. It might be a tweet from the comms PR Twitter account, or maybe that you actually pick up the phone to them, or you email them, or you contact them some other way, not through the channel which they put the message out originally. Obviously, just be sensitive to that. Some people don't like that sort of thing. But the other sort of thing that you get is a lot of the journalists that you deal with, they're often customers as well, and they may or may not have good or bad experiences of actually having you as their bank. And sometimes when they get frustrated, as often other people do as well, they may go to Twitter to vent their feelings. And so here you have Emma Wolf says, okay, I give up. I banked with Barclays for 25 years plus. I stuck with you through all the banking scandals, but I think it's time to move my account. And here's one from Adam Lee Porter, a bit shorter. Lloyds, probably the worst bank in the world. Now, the interesting thing is that both of these tweets have actually been deleted. We've got them in our systems because we index everything. And so it might be interesting, for you as a PR person, just to see, who of my journalists actually bank with us, or our competitors perhaps, and are they actually having a good or bad experience? Could that possibly affect the way their opinion about us when they come to write about us? And so, it's just good, important things to perhaps be aware of. I'm looking here now at a chart that is simply showing the volume of all the financial journalists' Twitter activity day by day from May through to the end of September. And there's no filtering on this. This is simply just getting all of the tweets from these journalists. What I wanted to show here is how listening to the right people, even if you're not using any keywords for tracking, can be a really good way for PRs just to keep on top of the key issues of the day. I'm sure most people in the call have probably got some kind of media monitoring service in place. It's probably sending you clips. It may be we're doing it, or it could be someone else. Clips where your banks are mentioned, your competitors. It might be some industry stuff. But you'd think, that journalists, if there's a major thing happening in that day in your sector to do with your industry, they are going to be talking about it. They're going to pick up on it. So what I want to show here is just how tracking the key influencers who are focused in your subject area is actually a really good way of just keeping a finger on the pulse of what's going on day by day. So on here we've got a couple of spikes. You can probably guess what that one is. 18th and 19th of September. But we've got a couple of other spikes here. What I want to show is that if we just do a simple word cloud, this is from the 8th of May, just a word cloud of what are the themes that those journalists are talking about on that day, and actually Barclays pops up. So this is when Barclays announced a round of redundancies and various issues that they've had sort of building up over time. And you can see some other words going on around the side, but this just gives you a quick snapshot of what were the key issues in our industry on May the 8th. And there's no additional kind of filtering going into this, just a raw feed of the key 150 finance journalists nationally. And then on the 5th of June, it was actually a discussion mainly dominated by the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Quite often journalists will pay homage to anniversaries like this where human rights or free speech were challenged. And then this is from yesterday. So what were people talking about yesterday? Well, it was Occupy Hong Kong, really big, important financial centre, and naturally many UK financial journalists are really focused and paying a lot of attention to what happens in Hong Kong because it will have an impact on other financial centres like London. So I want to talk a bit now about how to get alerts. So it's all well and good to have a tool that you can dip into, you can see what's going on, but PRs are often very busy. Some of your colleagues who are looking at social media, that might be their full-time job. I'm sure a lot of the people on the call have got a social media team, and they're in social media every day. They're dealing with lots of stuff, minute by minute. You may not have that luxury. You've probably got loads of things going on. So how can piece of software help you keep abreast of the most important things that you need to react to. So this is my alert priorities triangulation table. And what I want to look at here is the three sort of columns. So who is saying it, what are they saying, and what are they talking about? And if you combine these things together, you can actually get a really relevant alert that will make sure that you are notified if something important happens. So the top row there is simply saying that if the top influencer, so if it's a key journalist or it's a leading politician, and they say anything about you, that's probably worth you getting an alert. Just because we know that that person is really important. It doesn't matter what they say. If they mention you, it's probably good for you to be notified about that as a senior comms person. Second row, other influencers. So there's maybe other journalists, maybe not quite so important, maybe not focused on your subject area, or it could be advocacy groups, or it could be, I don't know, some of your competitors, key people. But if they're talking about you in relation to perhaps a key theme, so maybe they're talking about your reputation or your profit or a fine or something like that, then you say, right, well, that's probably worth getting. I want to know about that. That same audience, it may be worth also getting things that they're saying, not necessarily just about you, but about the wider industry. So if they talk about, I don't know, a CEO being sacked from a competitor, or there's some scandal going on, or something very, I don't know, about libel, or there's a fine, or there's some rogue trader or something like that. It'll vary, company by company what you see those critical issues to be. But you may say, if someone's coming on and they say something that's really important and it's about anything in our industry, that's probably also worth getting as well. And finally, you may have those same critical issues, but if they're about you and they're coming from anybody, that's maybe also good, because you never know where the leak may come from. It could be, someone other than a journalist who picks up on it. So, if you're looking at that and you're really struggling to think about practically how to go about doing that, just get in touch with us. We do this for a lot of our clients. With the right technology, it's actually relatively straightforward, provided we've got a clear view of who our influencers are and what the issues are. So I'm going to comment on that now. So when we're thinking about our influencers, so obviously we've talked about journalists being really important, but obviously politicians now are increasingly active in social media. Many have their own Twitter accounts or their own blogs, or some of these other channels as well. And we may want to see, what are they talking about on these channels. There's often people who are knowledge experts and they blog, so they don't write for a mainstream outlet, but they are recognized as knowing their stuff. You may have analysts, you may have senior personnel, either at your bank or other financial services firms, industry leaders, so key people in places like the CBI or the FSB, those sorts of places. There's loads of campaign groups, some of which may be outright hostile to you, or they may be partners for some of your CSR activities. And also there are various think tanks and groups. So you may have a clear idea who these influencers are already. Some of you may have agencies who can help with this. And if you're an agency, you may want to be talking in this sort of framework with your clients. And we can also help from a kind of listening and analysis point of view as well, with helping to identify who these people are. And then you can use that to structure the way that you do your monitoring and your alerting. In terms of the issues, so we touched on a number of these already, but it could be things like senior personnel changes, results coming out, especially if they've been leaked or they're wrong, fines and penalties, people talking about bad practices, CSR activities on the positive side, so they may just be very keen to see some of the good stuff that's getting talked about and try to amplify that. Comments from political leaders, so we're in a party conference season, and quite often there's lots of things going on around the main talk. So I'm not talking about something that a leader might say from the main podium, but maybe something that gets said in a fringe meeting, or just a conversation that happens in a corridor, either with a journalist or something that they overhear. So those are the sort of things you may just want to pick up on those as quickly as possible. You may also have some key clients and key partners who you want to make sure stay on good terms with you, and you may also want to track for any times they get mentioned in an area that relates to the services that you provide. So those are some of the influences and issues that we want to use in our configuration of alerts. So how do we get those alerts? Well, I talked about email. If it's during the day, obviously get those to your work email. Some of you may really not like this idea at all, but I know some clients will actually get alerts for really critical stuff configured to go to their personal email accounts, just so you don't have to carry your work mobile around with you. As we've shown before, journalists are not just active 9 to 5. They are, and actually the late evening is often a peak time for journalist activity on Twitter. So if you're simply reacting to them during the working day, there are some potential reputational risks that may come out of ours. That's fortunately, as I'm sure many people are all too familiar with, one of the hazards of working in PR is you're not always able to leave work at the office, but getting a trigger outside of your working role may be a way of just keeping on top of the key things. Dashboards as well are good to log into, but often people just don't have time to get into those on a regular basis. But if you are doing that, I'd recommend having some kind of second screen or something so it can just run alongside your main monitor. Increasingly, we're seeing people adopting social media command centers. If you've been to visit us here at our Old Street office, and our reception, we've actually got some screens up. If you're coming to see us in the near future, maybe just ask us to talk you through that so you can see how because we track all the journalists and we visualize it on our screens there. But we partner with Brandwatch, and they've got a really powerful visualization platform called Visio, and they've just relaunched that with some great new functionality, which could be really useful if you are a bigger brand, bigger bank, and there's lots of things going on, and you want to just get a way of seeing that without having to get alerts and logging in, then something that could be good just to have something on a screen in a centrally visible point in your office. So your team, regardless of who's in or out, can just be able to get some visibility on what's happening. And I think also for agencies it's quite good to have those sort of command centers available. They're increasingly powerful and also increasingly flexible and affordable. So if that's something of interest, I'm not going to go into detail on that now, but maybe contact us afterwards. So just to kind of then move on beyond sort of the alerting piece to talk a bit about reputation in terms of analysis and insights. So just to recap a couple of things. So saying social media analysis can be a really important way of measuring medium to long-term trends in the reputation of your brand, but that media coverage may be more positive in tone, but the public do not necessarily believe what they read if their opinions have hardened. So what I'm saying here is that you may be doing a really good job in talking to your journalists, getting them to start saying things that are a bit more positive about you, but often we know that that doesn't necessarily change people's opinions. As you saw from that quote at the very beginning from Andrew Tyree, we're going to be looking at years to rebuild trust and to restore reputations. So social media monitoring could be a good way just to see whether those long-term trends are going in the right direction. But there are a number of challenges in doing this, so I just want to address a few of those. So automated sentiment is the main way in which we look at these issues in social media tools because the volume of data is so large we can't manually review everything. So my key tips when it comes to reporting on social media and reputation is to focus on looking at the ratio of positive to negative comments. So take out the neutral. There will be a lot of stuff that is really positive or negative in the neutral, but if you actually compare the ratio of positive to negative, that gives you a clearer view as to how you're doing. I would also say to watch out for top tweets. So these are tweets that get retweeted a lot. Quite often they appear in this subject area, and quite often it's comedians making jokes. Those are the sort of things that can really confuse an automated scoring system. So you may want to just take those out. I mean, they're important, but if you want to get a clearer view of the underlying trend, you may want to just take those out of your key data set. I'd also say it's important to actually measure your share of positive and negative coverage. So how much of the negative discussion is about you and how much of the positive discussion is about you. It's obviously similar to the overall ratio of positive to negative, but you may not be able to, a lot of this is proportional. So many banks are tarred with the same brush, but often people do have to bank somewhere. So sometimes, unfortunately, it's simply a case of going with the least bad option in people's minds. So people may not like your brand overall, but they may see that you're better than your competitors. So that can also still be just an important thing to measure. Ideally, obviously, we want to get past that and get to the point where banks are trusted and people recognize the positive contribution they make to society overall, but you may be a few years away from that. And finally, just to say that we need to look at the reputation of the industry as a whole. There are some people who just see all banks as exactly the same, and they don't care whether it's a building society or a bank. And so you may get people who just talk about bankers, the banking industry, banks generally. And I would say that it's really important, if you're doing wider reputation monitoring, to look at that as well. You have to look at the reputation of the industry in order to understand your performance in it, because some of the things that you do will be more determined by how people see the industry as a whole and not necessarily specifically something that you have done as a brand. Moving beyond automated sentiment, there's a couple of other things that are important to look at. So we talked about various different issues that we could identify as being important for your reputation. So we need to kind of be clear on what those are. And with the right tool, we can actually program those and get the system that you're using to tag mentions that relate to those key reputational issues. What you can then do is to look at the trend of those issues over time. So are more or less people talking about, corruption, bad practices, fraud, deception, those sort of general negative terms? So the automated scoring system may not always understand that people talking about those issues is actually bad in the sentiment context, but we know that they're bad. So we may just want to track the trend in some of those negative terms over time, but also maybe want to look at some of the more positive things. So like some of the CSR activities and banks helping with at an education or employment or local communities or green initiatives, those sort of things. You may also then want to look at your share of voice on issues against your peers. So if we take all of the social media posts about fines and bankers getting sent to jail, that sort of thing, how prominently does your bank feature on the discussion around that issue? And is that changing over time? So, if more than half of all the discussions about fines is about your bank, that's obviously a major problem, and we need to see that reduced. So there are some metrics. I'm trying to focus here on things that we can actually use automation to help with, provided we've got the right setup. And then we also, where you can, if it does obviously cost a bit extra, but doesn't need to break the bank, no pun intended. But we can apply manual analysis for mentions, and I'd say to focus these on mentions related to key personnel, people talking about the reputation and trust issues, or talking about longer-term strategy and success of the bank, but also to look at comments from key influencers. So you may want to just focus on sentiments on posts from journalists. And again, this is where there's some more nuances and where the automated sentiment can really struggle. So that's why you may want to apply manual analysis. So just to wrap up then, to say the two things we looked at are sort of day-to-day monitoring, how to use social media for helping you keep on top of your reputation in social media. So I'd say here, the focus is on the issues and individuals that matter most. Don't try to track everything, and don't obsess over each and every article. There are some tools that will send you every article, and you can kind of drown a little bit in the data. And so I'd say just to be wary of getting sucked into a negative blog post, because it may be that the only person who's read that is you and the author of the post. So target your efforts on the people that you know are important. And then for reporting and analysis, I'd say it's almost the opposite that is true, that the more data that you have, the better the insights you're going to get are going to be. So get the bigger picture to provide context. So look at the overall trends and sentiments for the industry, the key themes that are challenging for the industry as a whole, and that will help you make sense of your profile within that. And also, don't just focus on your own business. It isn't just about tracking each individual post about you. You need to be aware of things that may be about the industry that, by sort of guilty by association almost, that they may affect you. So those are my key takeaways. I really hope that's been helpful for you. I do just want to open the floor and give people an opportunity to ask some questions. Actually, we've got quite a lot already, so let's just go up. Okay, so we've got one here. So did you do any analysis on times when they tweet in the day and any time best to interact? Yes, we've actually got some stats overall. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but we do generally see that one of the peak times that journalists are active in social media is just in the build-up to the lunch period. But then there's also a spike sort of around between sort of 6 and 8 o'clock p.m. A lot of publishers actually have a publishing cycle where they put stuff out in the late evening, so they're often quite active discussing things later. And the weekends, much less activity, but nonetheless there is still activity. I think for financial services, though, it's the weekends are proportionally less important than other subject areas. So retail still has quite a bit for the weekends, lifestyle, sports, politics, obviously, but the corporate world is very much a Monday to Friday activity. But the early morning commute is often an area where generally the wider public is active, but I think journalists they tend to kick in a little bit later in the morning. So there's a question here, but what about other social networks? Google Plus, Instagram, Facebook. Elo, yes, that's the new one now, isn't it? The anti-Facebook platform. And any insights as to whether journalists use those? So yeah, journalists do play around with a lot of those. Twitter is by far and away the major platform. It's there as a means of breaking and sharing news, critiquing posts, and so I'd say you really focus your efforts on Twitter. Google Plus is proportionally more important in the tech space and entrepreneurial space, so don't see a large number of financial journalists really using Google Plus. Instagram as well, much more important to the likes of retail and fashion journalists, but again, not really being picked up a great deal by journalists. And Facebook, you get occasional Facebook, but generally speaking, as is the case, I think for most professionals, is that Facebook is more of a private network, and Twitter is often the sort of public one. Hello, early days. I'd be interested to see how that works. I think there's quite a few journalists probably getting into that just to see how it works and what's going to happen with it. For anyone who doesn't know, Hello is the new social network, a bit like Facebook, but there's not meant to be any data analysis or advertising, but you kind of have to pay to use certain functions. So there's a bit of skepticism about whether that model is actually going to work, whether people are going to want to be using Hello as a platform. And just another question was about data visualization, so command centers. Some businesses I know will have these primarily as a tool for the customer service team, and that's very much kind of a case of just having a feed so everyone can see on screen individual posts, and it's typically focused on sort of at mentions. For the corporate PR space, you may have the option to use that same tool. It depends what data is powering it. I'd also say that with customer services ones, that they typically don't need to change what they actually search for. So you can actually have a fairly static display. It's pretty much the same configuration every day. You just need to see, number of tweets, the agents who are logged in, how quickly you reply. For PR and comms, you need to have, the ideal is to have a tool that you can actually adapt as you go along. So the issues that you want to focus on may change day by day. So you need an analytical platform that allows you that flexibility, but you also need a command center that allows you to change what you look at. The view that we have in our reception here is quite good. It just gives us a snapshot of what journalists are talking about every day. Another thing actually I haven't mentioned is that if you are tracking journalists and you're looking at what they're sharing, you can also get a bit of insight into what articles are popular. So you can, you may have two articles published on the same website on the same day, at the same time even, but they may have very, very different audiences because one, has maybe got a real good scoop in it, it's got a funny picture or something like that, or it's really controversial, and it gets shared massively in social networks. Publishers themselves are increasingly trying to respond to that, so that they will adapt the layout of the content on their main pages to reflect the content that's popular, and stuff that's not getting a lot of views will be buried away into the archive quicker than stuff that's being shared. So keeping a tab on what links are being shared, can, so you may get your monitoring clipbook in the morning, you get a load of articles, and the sort of monitoring throughout the day, especially for the journalists, can help you get an idea of which of those stories are the ones that are actually getting the most traction. So that's it actually for questions on through the panel, and I think we could probably just wrap up there. But if people do have any other questions, feel free just to message us afterwards, or contact me on email or LinkedIn, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.